Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast, where we triple your impact per engineer. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor and consultant to tech executives worldwide, and our subject today is It's Never Too Early. I'm guessing you're wondering what? Shouldn't be It's Never Too Late, but yeah, I'm talking about It's Never Too Early. Let's get into that. Recently, I've been talking to many people about how they're going to be measuring whether 2021 was a good year and how are they setting themselves up and their organizations to create 2022 as an amazing platform of improvement and as a year where we'll be doing even better. To get there, we have to realize how are we measuring ourselves? What are our objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And as I'm talking about that, there's a question that I'm hearing more and more. Just last week, I had a global workshop with people from several different countries here in the area. And one thing that I noticed, no matter the company's real stage, we're not talking about unicorns, but companies and seed A and B stages, all of them are talking about, are we not too early to start thinking about a serious, in air quotes, platform such as OKRs? Is it too early for us to start talking about an objective that we're committing to for a year or even a quarter? Aren't those too much time? Things change here too often. My CEO doesn't necessarily even know what we'll be doing in 3 months, that sort of stuff. And well, I know how startups work. I've been doing this for over a decade. And yet, I can tell you that one thing we're really good at is cutting ourselves too much slack where we ought not to. One such area is when it comes to planning. If you've been around when Agile started getting more traction, you probably noticed that we used to do a lot of documentation and write about why we're doing stuff. And then it was as if Agile, I'm putting it in air quotes, the Agile came and told us that we now have a get out of jail free card. We no longer have to write about how we're going to be doing the architecture or the design of this new big thing. We don't need to plan too much. We just get going. We ship things, right? We do things fast and we fail fast, etc., etc. And that approach has a lot of good to it. But the problem is that, as with anything, once we take it too far down the line, once we go to an extreme, we get to a point where it's not that we are only doing as much planning as is necessary. We are not doing enough planning at all. And the same, of course, applies when we look bigger than just your team and think about the entire company, about how you are setting goals for the company to succeed. So, as I, for example, tell my engineering clients, when I'm working with a VP of R&D, I'm telling them, you have to ensure that the team is doing some planning. So if there's a big feature, you have to make sure that you have the goalpost, that you know how this is going to shape out as they're starting to work, rather than just accept a big feature that's at least a month's work, for example, without doing any prior thinking and ensuring that this is not going to be a huge time suck. And I'm going to get maybe to the concept of how should you be estimating and this whole no estimates trend in a later episode. But for now, let's say that this is a problem for engineers. And even as I'm working nowadays with COOs, CEOs, and helping them guide their entire company, I always see that there's this tendency to think, we are too early, we are not certain yet, what should we be doing? So how can I commit to an objective for a whole year or even a quarter? I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 weeks. This is something that I constantly, repeatedly hear. But you know what? That is a lie, folks. That's not true, because you do know, to an extent, obviously, but you do know. If you go through a complete pivot because there's, 3 pandemics and you change things from one end to the other, all right, I'm going to be okay with that. No one's going to put a gun to your head and say, no. That Notion document you created 4 months ago stated 3 OKRs and you're going to have to do them. That's not going to happen, right? So the question is, how can we plan correctly, invest the right amount of time into this planning, and why should we be doing this? My point is that without doing some planning, without taking care of putting into writing, of sharing with your team some guiding objectives, some bigger goals that you're going for, even without saying specifically how you're going to be progressing to achieve those goals, not just yet, without doing that, your team will not be able to assess their work, will not be able to help you with prioritization. So, for example, if you're doing what too many companies are doing, and essentially you are just providing your team with something to do within the next 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, sprint, here's what you're doing, talk to you in 2 weeks. And then, all right, good, bad, whatever, here are the next things you're going to work on in the next 2 weeks. What you end up doing is that you're not providing your team with any vision. They don't know where they're headed. They're like, when I was learning how to drive, the driving instructor next to me didn't tell me we're driving now to wherever. I was just holding the wheel and he would say, turn left, turn right, keep straight. I didn't know where we were going, and that meant that I couldn't plan a route. I wasn't able to know whether I should be near the right lane or the left lane because I couldn't tell which way I'm going to be turning soon, that sort of stuff, and I couldn't even plan a completely different route. So the same applies to your team because this is what you're doing in those situations. When you're not providing them with an end goal, with a problem to solve, as Marty Kagan says, what you end up doing is creating these teams that are nearsighted, they're myopic. And this is not the myopia I talked about in my latest article, which you can check out on my website, but it is very similar. Now, contrast that with the concept of providing your team with a bigger goal so that we know, for example, that in this quarter, what we want to do is get to product market fit. During this time, the team is coming up with different approaches of getting there or evaluating different hypotheses in order to find out which one is going to get us there. How you get whatever the team specifically is doing is a matter for a different episode. But let's say that you have two engineers, they're working on something, and all of a sudden they realize that, hey, this might not be the best way of doing stuff. All of a sudden they can come up to you and tell you that they have a better idea. Why? Because they're not just focusing on the fact that you told them to turn left and now they have to turn left at the next stop line, but they know that you told them that we have to get to that place out of town, and they know that around this time, if we go left, we're going to get straight into rush hour. So maybe should we just keep straight and then take that different route? That sort of stuff is only possible if they understand where they are heading. And what I have to tell you as a VP, as a CTO, as a CEO, as I've told my CEO clients in the past 2 weeks several times, you do know what your bigger objectives are. Don't think about an objective that's extremely specific and might change as you realize different things about the market. So saying, for example, we need 10 clients in sector X, where you're not sure that your product is even going to work for sector X, might not be a good yearly goal. But setting a goal such as getting X clients in general might be a better way of doing that. So think, what are you pretty certain that you're going to be doing? You're probably still going to work on getting your first users, getting some revenue, increasing retention, increasing lifetime value. There are things that we know you're going to be doing anyway. So maybe think of those as your objectives and make sure to tie things up so that your team understands where you're headed. At the end of the day, your plan might not be the plan in 2 months, but planning makes things a lot better. And that's what I'm asking you to consider. So no, it is not too early. Start planning. I've seen this done successfully in teams that are as small as 3 people. So I'm pretty certain you can do the same. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. Happy Christmas for all of you celebrating. If you haven't yet, subscribe to my newsletter where you can get weekly exclusive insights I don't share anywhere else. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to me. My email is in the show notes. Thank you, and talk soon.